What happens when one of America's most respected journalists faces off against one of the world's most controversial royals? Under the dim glow of the NBC Nightly news studio lights, a conversation that was meant to shed light quickly turns into a battlefield of pride, sarcasm, and raw frustration. Meghan Markle walked in prepared to control the narrative. Lester Holt welcomed her with his trademark professionalism. But within minutes, the tone shifted. What began as a polite interview spiraled into a clash so intense, the cameras seemed to tremble in the silence between their words. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's night with Lester Holt unraveled on national television. The NBC Nightly news studio was unusually quiet that evening. The set had been stripped down for an intimate one-on-one conversation. No live audience, no applause, just two chairs under soft but focused lighting, the rest of the room fading into a deep, almost theatrical black. The atmosphere felt serious, heavy with expectation. Lester Holt, dressed in his usual dark suit and calm demeanor, stood to greet his guest. "Meghan, thank you for being here tonight," he said with the steady warmth that had earned him the trust of millions of Americans. Meghan stepped onto the set, her posture sharp, her chin tilted ever so slightly upward. She gave a small smile that looked polished rather than genuine. "It's always enlightening to be invited to these things," she replied, her voice carrying a deliberate edge, as if already bracing herself against imagined insults. They both sat down. The camera zoomed in. For a moment, the studio felt suspended in time, like the world was holding its breath. Lester began gently, setting the tone. "You've built quite a life here in America since stepping away from the royal family. How has the adjustment been for you?" A simple question. Yet Meghan's eyes flickered with impatience. "Adjustment? Lester, I didn't come here to adjust. I came here to live freely. There's nothing to adjust to when you finally stop being suffocated. Perhaps people should stop framing my life as a struggle to adapt and start recognizing it as me finally being who I've always been." Lester gave a practiced nod, absorbing the sharpness. He didn't flinch. "I see. But I think many people are curious about the differences you've experienced. The transition from being part of an institution as old as the monarchy to building an independent life here." Meghan tilted her head, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. "Why does it always go back to the monarchy? I mean, is there any interview where I'm not dragged back into it? I left. I walked away. Yet here we are, still obsessed with the institution. Perhaps the media should evolve, Lester." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Lester pressed on, calm as ever. "Fair enough. Let's talk about your family here then. You and Prince Harry have settled in California with your children. How has parenthood shaped your perspective?" Meghan let out a small laugh, not one of amusement, but of dismissal. "Parenthood is, well, it's parenthood. Do you want me to give you the fairy tale version? The picture-perfect royal family soundbite? Because if that's what you're fishing for, Lester, you're not going to get it." Her tone was clipped, her eyes flashing. The audience at home couldn't feel the tension in the studio, but Lester could. He leaned back slightly, hands folded on his lap. "I wasn't fishing. I was simply asking. People often find it inspiring to hear how public figures navigate parenthood." That's all. Meghan shifted in her chair. "Inspiring? I don't exist to inspire strangers. My children don't exist for public consumption. Maybe people should stop asking about them as if they're characters in some global soap opera. They're my children. Period." Her words hung in the air like a slap. Lester's jaw tightened just slightly. So slight it was almost imperceptible. Years of journalism had trained him to mask irritation, but Meghan's tone was sharper than most of the contentious interviews he'd handled. Still, he kept his composure. "Understood. Let's move forward. Many Americans are fascinated not just by your current life, but by what you left behind. The royal family has been central to your story, whether you like it or not. Do you think in hindsight that you underestimated the weight of marrying into such an institution?" For a moment, Meghan froze. Her smile returned, but it was the tight, brittle kind. "You know, Lester, questions like that sound almost insulting. Did I underestimate? No, I didn't underestimate anything. I knew exactly what I was getting into. The problem wasn't me underestimating. The problem was everyone else underestimating me. Do you understand the difference? Her tone rose slightly at the end, a challenge disguised as explanation. Lester nodded again, still calm. I do understand. I suppose the reason I ask is because... But Meghan cut him off, her voice rising louder this time. Because what? Because it's so hard for people to grasp that I was capable of handling it? Or is it because you'd prefer to believe I was naive, that I wasn't strong enough? You see, Lester, that's the narrative people cling to, this fantasy that I was fragile. And I'm telling you, I wasn't. I'm not. The silence that followed was thick. Lester adjusted his glasses and took a measured breath. Thank you for clarifying, he said finally, voice calm but firmer now. Already the balance of the room was shifting. The respectful conversation that Lester had envisioned was slipping into something else, something sharper, more combative, and Meghan seemed eager to lean into it. The lights above hummed faintly, casting their glow over a set that was beginning to feel less like an interview space and more like a boxing ring. And this was only the beginning. The hum of the studio lights filled the silence as Lester Holt glanced at his notes, steadying himself. Years of live broadcasts had taught him patience, but this interview was already drifting into dangerous waters. Meghan's posture had stiffened, her shoulders squared, chin lifted in defiance. Her eyes carried a glint that seemed less conversational and more confrontational. Lester leaned slightly forward, keeping his voice calm and measured. I appreciate your perspective, Meghan. Let me ask you about something more personal, your relationship with Harry. Many viewers wonder how the two of you balance public pressure with private life. How do you and your husband support each other through it all? It was a gentle question, one designed to soften the air, but Meghan's lips curled into a smirk that almost seemed rehearsed. Support? Lester, do you think we sit around needing pep talks like some reality TV couple? Harry and I don't need to balance anything. We're not amateurs at life. People underestimate us constantly, as if we're barely holding it together. It's insulting. Really, Lester adjusted his glasses, nodding slowly, letting her words hang in the air before speaking again. I didn't mean to suggest anything of the sort. I suppose I was asking in the sense of, well, many couples find strength in sharing their challenges, and viewers at home might relate to that. Meghan leaned back, crossing her arms. Her tone sharpened. Viewers at home? Lester, I didn't come here to give a self-help seminar. My marriage isn't a public case study. Harry and I don't exist for other people to relate to. We live our lives, and if people can't understand that, that's their issue, not mine. The atmosphere in the studio thickened. The black backdrop seemed to close in, amplifying every word, every pause. Lester glanced down at his notes again, but this time his movements were slower, heavier. He was aware now that every question risked being turned into a sparring match. Still, he pressed on with professionalism. Let's talk about the broader picture then. You've spoken openly about your feelings toward the monarchy. Many people are curious. When you look back, what do you think about the institution you left behind? Meghan's eyes narrowed. Her voice carried an icy edge. The monarchy. Always back to the monarchy. You know what I think, Lester? I think it's outdated, antiquated, a gilded cage for everyone inside it. And the funny thing, people worship it as though it's sacred, as though it represents something divine. But really, it's theater, a grand performance that eats people alive. Lester stayed quiet, his face calm, but his fingers tapped ever so slightly against his notepad. He had handled presidents, dictators, and CEOs who'd tried to intimidate him. Yet Meghan's dismissive tone carried a different weight, less political, more personal. Some would argue, he replied carefully, that while flawed, the monarchy holds cultural and historical significance. Do you feel any sense of responsibility for how your departure was perceived? Meghan let out a sharp laugh, the kind that dripped with condescension. Responsibility? Lester, I'm not responsible for people's fantasies. If the world wants to cling to a crumbling institution, that's their business. My only responsibility is to myself and my family. If that makes me the villain in their story, so be it. Lester tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. The tension between them was undeniable now. His professionalism kept his tone even, but his patience was thinning. I understand your frustration, but do you ever think that the way you communicate your experiences comes across as dismissive to those who've admired you? Meghan straightened, her gaze hardening. Dismissive? Or perhaps people simply don't like hearing the truth. I'm not here to be palatable, Lester. I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. If honesty makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should reflect on why. For a moment, silence filled the studio, the kind of silence that wasn't just empty air, but thick with electricity. Lester exhaled slowly through his nose, nodding as though absorbing the blow. He decided to pivot again. Let me ask you this. Your late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, remains a deeply beloved figure worldwide. Many people draw parallels between her experiences and yours. Do you feel a connection to her legacy? The question landed like a stone in the water. Meghan's jaw tightened. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes flashing. Diana's legacy doesn't need to be dragged into every conversation about me. It's disrespectful to keep using her name like a prop. I am not Diana. I never claimed to be. And frankly, the comparisons are lazy. She deserves better than that. Lester blinked, taking in her words. His voice remained steady, but there was an edge now. I didn't mean to imply you were her replacement. I was asking whether you feel a connection, given how she too dealt with intense media scrutiny. Meghan's tone grew colder still. Connection? Lester, do you want me to sit here and cry for the cameras just so you can splice together a narrative? That's not going to happen. I don't need to exploit someone else's tragedy to validate my own story. The words hit hard. Lester's lips pressed into a thin line. He leaned back, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his calm demeanor holding, but only just. The interview had begun like a professional conversation. Now it felt like a duel. Meghan's sharp retorts weren't just defensive, they were designed to sting. And though Lester's patience was legendary, the cracks in his composure were beginning to show. The studio lights hummed louder, or perhaps it only felt that way. The black backdrop behind them seemed to swallow the room, turning the interview into a spotlighted battlefield. This wasn't just journalism anymore. It was confrontation. And everyone watching at home could feel it. The air in the studio felt denser now, as though the black backdrop itself was leaning in to witness what was unfolding. Lester Holt shifted slightly in his chair, keeping his posture tall and his expression measured. His voice remained calm, but his questions carried sharper edges now, designed to cut through Meghan's walls of arrogance. Meghan, Lester began, many people admired the courage it took to step away from the royal family. But they also noticed that you and Harry continued to live a very public life. Netflix deals, interviews, memoirs. Some say it looks less like an escape from the spotlight and more like a rebranding within it. How do you respond to that? Meghan's lips pressed into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her response came quickly, dripping with disdain. Rebranding. That's such a tabloid word, Lester. I'm not a product on a shelf. I don't owe anyone silence just because I walked away from an outdated institution. If people can't handle the fact that I chose to tell my story on my terms, that's their problem, not mine. Lester nodded once, slowly, but pressed further. But when you make your story public, doesn't it become open to scrutiny? To accountability? Her eyes narrowed. Accountability? Interesting word. It always seems to mean holding me accountable, never the people or the system that harmed me. Isn't that convenient? There was a sting in her words, but Lester kept his composure. His voice, though, carried more weight now. Accountability works in both directions. When serious accusations are made against an institution, it's fair to ask questions about the person making them too. Don't you think that's part of honest conversation? Meghan leaned forward, her chin lifted defiantly. Honest conversation? Lester, this isn't honesty, it's interrogation. I came here thinking NBC wanted to talk about my work, my projects, my advocacy. Instead, I'm dragged into the same tired cycle. Monarchy, Diana, accountability, blah, blah, blah. Maybe the press needs to be held accountable for its obsession. The words hung heavy. Lester blinked, letting the silence stretch. the way a veteran anchor knows silence can be louder than a question. Finally, he spoke, his tone calm but firmer than before. I think our viewers would argue that these questions aren't an obsession. They're context. They're part of your story, whether you want them to be or not. Meghan scoffed, a sharp laugh echoing through the empty studio. Context? Or maybe it's just laziness. It's easier to recycle the same narratives than actually talk about who I am now. But perhaps that's too much to ask, isn't it, Lester? For the first time, a flicker of irritation passed over Lester's face. It was subtle, just the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. But it was there. He straightened in his chair, his voice even lower now. I've interviewed world leaders, activists, survivors of tragedies. They didn't dismiss questions as laziness. They engaged. They shared. They recognized the value of dialogue. That's what this platform is for. Meghan's tone sharpened even more. Oh, so now I'm being compared to them? You expect me to perform gratitude for the chance to sit here? I don't need this platform, Lester. I'm not desperate for NBC's validation. The tension was now suffocating. The hum of the lights seemed louder, the shadows on the black backdrop deeper. Meghan's every word came out clipped, defensive, coated in arrogance. Lester's restraint was visibly thinning, though his professionalism still kept him tethered. He chose his next question carefully, his voice quieter but with an unmistakable gravity. Let me ask you about your husband then. Many people admire Prince Harry's willingness to leave the institution with you. But there are those who say he sacrificed more than you did. His family, his role, his country. How do you see his journey? Meghan's eyes flashed, her back stiffening. Harry made his choice because he's strong enough to stand by me. Don't make it sound like I dragged him. He's not some poor little prince who got led astray. He's a man who saw the truth and acted on it. If people can't respect that, it says more about them than us. Lester leaned back slightly, his expression tightening. Do you ever feel that your voice overshadows his? That sometimes people see your story as dominating his? That hit a nerve. Meghan's face hardened, her tone icy. Overshadows? Maybe people just aren't used to a woman being the center of the narrative instead of the silent accessory. Maybe the real issue is that people can't stomach the idea of a woman leading her own story. Her words rang out like a challenge, filling the empty studio with tension so thick it was almost visible. Lester inhaled deeply, his patience nearly spent. He spoke slowly, deliberately. I don't think anyone questions your right to your own story. What people struggle with is the contradiction. Rejecting the monarchy while profiting from its legacy, demanding privacy while signing deals that put your private life on display. These contradictions matter. Meghan shot back instantly, her voice rising. Contradictions? Or maybe complexity. But of course, nuance doesn't sell, does it, Lester? You'd rather box me into the villain role because it makes for good television. For the first time, Lester's calm veneer cracked. His brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a firm line. He didn't interrupt, but the silence afterward was colder than any words. The studio felt like it was on the edge of explosion. Meghan sat rigid, her expression one of defiance. Lester's composure was still present, but his patience was hanging by a thread. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a collision course, and everyone at home watching could sense it. The breaking point was coming. The studio was silent but tense, as if the black walls themselves were holding their breath. Lester Holt sat upright, the seasoned calm of a veteran journalist still in place, but beneath the surface, cracks had formed. Across from him, Meghan Markle leaned back on the white sofa, her posture commanding, her chin raised in a defiant angle that spoke louder than any words. Lester cleared his throat softly, trying one last time to restore balance. His voice was steady, professional. Meghan, I want to be very clear. This isn't an ambush. These questions come from a place of accountability, something you have often spoken about yourself. So let me ask directly, do you believe the choices you and Harry have made have brought you closer to the kind of peace you've often said you wanted? Meghan's laugh cut through the studio like broken glass. It was short, sharp, dismissive. Peace, she echoed. I don't think peace is something the media even understands. And frankly, Lester, I'm not here to satisfy the curiosity of people who've made a career out of dissecting me. Peace is mine, whether anyone else chooses to recognize it or not. Her words were laced with superiority, each syllable like a slap. Lester nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He glanced down at his notes, then back up, his tone firmer now. Yet, here you are, on another program, in another interview. Some might say if peace was truly yours, you wouldn't feel the need to constantly return to the spotlight. For the first time, Meghan's mask slipped. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Her eyes narrowed. And some might say you're proving exactly why people like me need to speak. Because otherwise, all we hear are the same recycled headlines from people like you. The remark struck like a spark on dry kindling. Lester exhaled slowly, set his cards aside, and leaned forward. His voice dropped, low but edged with steel. Enough, Meghan. I've tried to give you space. I've tried to keep this respectful. But the arrogance, the dismissiveness, the way you've spoken tonight, this isn't just difficult, it's insulting. Not to me, but to the viewers who expected honesty instead of hostility. The words landed heavy. Meghan blinked, clearly not expecting Lester to break form. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. Then she spoke, her voice sharp. Insulting? Lester, what's insulting is being dragged through the mud year after year and then being told I should sit here and smile politely while you question my every word. I don't need this, Lester's voice rose, not in volume but in authority, cutting through the room with the kind of gravity that left no space for argument. No, Meghan. What you don't need is to treat every legitimate question as an attack. What you don't need is to keep pretending you're above accountability. You say you despise the monarchy, but you've built your entire platform on the fame it gave you. You say you want privacy, but you sign multi-million-dollar deals to put your life on display. That isn't courage. That isn't authenticity. That's hypocrisy. Meghan froze, her face pale under the studio lights. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. Her lips parted, but no words came. Lester pressed on, his tone unwavering. You talk about truth, about standing in your power. But the truth is, without Harry, without that royal title you claim to despise, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. You've acted tonight not as a leader, not as an advocate, but as a spoiled child who thinks the world owes her deference. And Meghan, it doesn't. The studio's silence was deafening. The hum of the lights seemed louder, the black backdrop darker. Meghan's eyes widened, stunned. She gripped the edge of the sofa, her composure cracking in real time. You can't speak to me like that, she whispered, her voice trembling. Lester didn't flinch. I just did. And I did it because the viewers deserve honesty. This interview cannot continue, not like this. You've disrespected the platform, the conversation, and frankly, yourself. Meghan stood abruptly, her blazer falling back against her shoulders. She gathered her things with jerky movements, her face flushed with indignation. Fine, she snapped, her voice breaking. If this is what you wanted, congratulations. I won't sit here and be humiliated. Her heels clicked sharply against the studio floor as she strode toward the exit. The cameras followed until the director hastily cut away. The sound of the door closing reverberated like a gavel ending a trial. Lester remained seated, exhaling slowly, his face calm once more. He turned to the camera, his voice somber, measured. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe you an apology. What you just witnessed is not what we intended. This was meant to be a conversation, a chance for Meghan to share her perspective. Instead, it became something else entirely. And for that, I regret how it ended. Sometimes, no matter how much patience you bring, respect must flow both ways. Tonight, it didn't. He paused, letting his words sink in, then offered the faintest shake of his head. We'll be right back. The screen faded to black, but the moment was already etched in history, an interview that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered not for insight but for implosion. Meghan had walked out, but the weight of Lester's words lingered long after. If you enjoyed this dramatic story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the so you never miss the next explosive interview breakdown. Your support keeps these stories coming.